Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Baird, and I have the pleasure of talking with Elana Mugdan today. She is the author of the Shadow War Saga, and she's recently released Dragon Empress, which is a fantastic book, and it is on the shelves now. And you should go out and buy it if you've already read the rest of the Shadow War Saga. But spoiler alert, if you haven't read Dragon Speaker, you should pause the video right here, rush to your closest local bookstore and pick up a copy, and then read all the way through to the end of Dragon War before watching this rest of the video of Dragon Empress. So you see Dragon Speaker, Dragon Child, Dragon Blood, Dragon War, and then you can
Dragon Empress.
What we're going to talk about.
5 of the saga. So spoiler alert, spoilers shall abound.
So you know,
and the covers are spoilery.
It will be the formal conclusion of the Shadow War Saga. So if you've been reading along over the years with Elana, this is where the main story arc all comes together. So Elana, tell me about Dragon Empress. Why should I go out and read it?
Oh, well, this is the culmination of basically my life's work. And I came up with Dragon Speaker. I came up with Carrier Soulstar as a concept back when I was in 9th grade, when I was 14 years old. So this is what I've been driving toward. And actually, it's funny, over the years, I have built up little plot points, plot lines that were all meant to be resolved here in book 5. Even certain secrets that you weren't even really aware needed to be resolved. I knew they needed to be resolved and addressed. And then I got to start to write book 5, and I realized that I had changed as a person. My worldview had changed. When I was younger, I had this sort of viewpoint that not everything is black and white, everything is shades of gray. What is the definition of evil? Maybe there's no true evil, and everybody just has slightly different viewpoints. But after having lived in America and the world the last 5 years, I changed my viewpoint and I said, no, evil absolutely exists. And it's all around us, and we cannot compromise with it because that makes us complicit. So, unfortunate, because the original ending of this story was a more balanced, nuanced ending that I couldn't do it. I no longer believed that that was a good message to send to the world. I didn't like it anymore. So the ending changed, which almost undermined every plot line that I had been secretly laying. Fortunately, after several mental breakdowns, but fortunately after that, I did, I think, tie it together in a way that is satisfying to readers, at least I hope, and which does justice to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of a personal side of an answer. As for why readers would want to read it, I think it's sick.
That's great.
It's like, I like a lot of action in my books, and that has also changed over the years. The first couple books were more meandering. We're going on a quest, and the last 2 books, specifically Dragon War, obviously that's about the war. That's all war, all the time. This is more balanced. There's a lot of action and fighting, but a lot of it is emotion driven. So there are a lot of important and poignant character moments in battle scenes that I think give it this richness, this balance of action plus characterization and emotion, which I think is the better way to do action scenes. If it's just 100 pages of fight scene, that's not exciting. That's boring because you don't have any emotional stakes in the fight. And spoiler alert, back in 2008, I literally wrote 100 pages of battle for this book. Like I wrote the end of this book. I wrote the battle end, and it was 100 pages. And there was character stuff going on, but who knows? So we've come a long way. It's a lot better for it, for sure. The messaging, the ending. It's a bittersweet ending. I consider it a bittersweet ending, but hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, me too. Speaking of which, was Dragon Speaker your first book? Your first like full length novel?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It's my first book I wrote when I was 5. I didn't write it. I ran around the basement and dictated to my poor father, who was my secretary. I told a story, and it was about a dragon and a girl going on an adventure. So, you know,
obviously
2 decades later, nothing changed.
Yeah.
But it is the first book these are the first books that I worked on seriously.
Yep.
In terms of the first book I finished, I actually finished Dragon Blood first, because I used to do this fun thing where I just wrote out of order. I wrote whatever I felt like. And that worked for a time until it didn't, because then I got to books 4 and 5, which I really, like, I hadn't really written very much past. There's like a big stretch between point A and point B, which was like the end of book 3 to the fight scene of book 5. I had a lot going on in there that I didn't write, so it was difficult. So I learned my lesson, and now I'm even attempting to outline certain books, which is not working out, but yeah, this was definitely, it was the earliest story that I worked on. As I said, I came up with the concept when I was 14. It was spawned from something of a midlife crisis, I would say. You know, I had a mental breakdown when I turned 14, and I was like, I'm so old, I frittered away my youth. What am I doing with my life? I have to do something. And so therein, the creative demons were born.
Yeah. So you're saying that throughout the course of this book series, you went from being a pantser to a plotter, and you actually write outlines and stuff now?
This maybe. So I did actually. All right. This is why I outlined Dragon War, and it's still, I think it's like structurally, it's the best book I've written, because I actually outlined it. And bear in mind, I wrote 3 or 4 outlines before I came up with one that was actually like, this is good. So I mix and match elements from each of those outlines that I liked, and until I finally came up with a formula that said, all right, this is the winning formula. And then once I had that outline, you know, I wrote 200,000 words in 40 days.
Yeah, that's fast.
And then I cut it down, because it cannot be 200,000 words. It came up to probably about 170 words. So this is actually the longest book.
Wow.
Dragon Empress, I didn't want it to be that many pages. I wanted to cut down on the pages. So, because all the prices are going up, and I almost can't afford to print books anymore, because I give people such a huge discount, but I'm making like 1 penny per book now. So it's kind of a bummer. So I was like, I got to cut like 20,000 words out of book 5. And I did, ultimately. So now it's closer to the length of book 3.
If you're ever looking to get rid of like 20,000 words again, you can give them to me.
Sure.
I can put them in one of my books.
I am an overwriter. That's for sure. Yes.
The longest I've ever written was 120, was one of my novels. And
well, that's a good, decent
that was a hike. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it depends on genre, because these are young adult, and that's way too long for young adult. 120 really should be the max for young adult fantasy sci-fi. If they were adult, it would be closer to genre acceptability, but I'm self-publishing these now. I don't have any restrictions, except for the monetary ones that I have to pay myself.
All right. So one question I had was, I've got a couple questions actually.
Okay.
If you were to, let's say, go visit in real life, one of the locations within Elendria, where would you go and why? I know where I would go. I have some things I want.
Well, I want to hear your answer next. The easiest and obvious answer would be wherever there are dragons, which is kind of a cop-out answer. So I would definitely want to go visit Shivnath. Absolutely. If we're talking, and I would like to visit Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be spooky, but that's my vibe. Kraken is actually one of my favorite characters. Just in terms of like voice, he was one of the funnest to write, right up there with Cezanne. And but in terms of like real places, geographically, I think the Goron Islands, because they have the best flora and fauna.
Yeah.
It's filled with these whimsical giant bug creatures and, you know, giant dragonflies that you can fly on, giant spiders that you can ride, giant krill that you could also ride, and they're strong enough to take down a destroyer. And that to me, that is me. Like, I love bugs, and I love them the bigger they are, ironically. So just in terms of aesthetic and creatures that are cool and awesome, I would go to the Goron Islands.
Oh, cool. And
it's a tropical island chain, so how can you go wrong, really?
So me personally, I have a little bit of a Anakin Skywalker thing about sand, but I would go to Judean probably. I like the military aspect of it and the fact that it's like so interwoven into their society, and there's like a strict sense of order and just, you know, strict sense of discipline, and everybody's working their way up through the kind of chain of command and being warriors. And I really like that aspect. I mean, maybe it's a little
awesome.
But no, I think that'd be kind of a neat place to live if it had like
a
little more rainfall, maybe.
They could do with some more rainfall for sure. It does get scorching there, but I think there's also a beauty in the aridness of it. I had once gotten, somebody was like, this is boring, it's sand. And I'm like, well, I think it's beautiful. It's not, I wouldn't live there, but everywhere in the natural world, I think, has a natural beauty to it. And I definitely pulled inspiration from the real world to craft all of these mythical ones. So I don't want to say imaginary, because I'm like, well, what if it's real? But yeah, no, I like Judean as well. And actually, I wish that I could have shown more of the coast of Judean, because when you get to Dane, which is the coastal city from which they disembark and start returning to Elentria, it's got this real nice Mediterranean, almost Greece, the Grecian seaside, with, you know, the domed roofs, domed painted roofs on terraced cliffs and such. And I love that imagery. And so this kind of pulls a little bit of inspiration from that. And that I would absolutely love to visit, both Greece and Judean.
Yeah. All right, nice. Another question I had. So this is kind of formally concluding the arc covering Caria, but obviously she has a very close circle of friends, people who were with her from Dragon Speaker all the way up. But even if they didn't maybe make it all the way to the end, if you were to start another, like let's say a spin-off arc that was loosely overlapped in the Venn diagram of your story, who would be the next character that you would write a story about if you had the opportunity?
Well, in hindsight, multi-POV, writing all these people, a bajillion people. Number one, mistake, never doing that again. But number two, I became very attached to all of them. And I'm like, this is why they're all 170,000 words long, is because every one of these people really deserves their own story. I think they are really, like, everybody. And that's something I'm actually proud of. Everybody changes a lot from book 1 to book 5, like a lot. They grow and they change, and they have acted upon the world, and those actions have had repercussions, and they have changed the world as a result. So really, like, everybody could have their own story. The stories I'm most attached to are, and actually Roxanne, I like her story, and I really like it. It could have and should have been more fleshed out. And I would do that if she had her own story. I like Saba. I like Cezanne. I like the idea of a Cezanne spinoff. Just him going off and bumbling around the world and getting up to piratey hijinks.
A salty old pirate.
Trouble. and he doesn't change at all. He just never learns his lesson. But actually, I do have the beginnings, or I did have the beginnings of a Shivnath spinoff showing her, I don't want to say anything too spoilery, but how she became the dragon god and guardian of the Smarlands, essentially. Number one. And number two, the Great War. I had started work on, and this was sort of my intention for a long time, which I don't think I'm necessarily going to do it now unless I get a huge readership in the next few years, which is always possible. I can always come back to it. But I'd like to do a Great War trilogy, which shows Hellcrypt and his corruption arc, basically, Valerion and his origin story, and the unsung hero of the Second Age, who is actually much more of a hero than Valerion kind of ever was. And this is sort of the point of the story. It's Beldine, who is referenced throughout the books in passing, and there's not a lot of literature on her because she's a woman. So the men around her always took credit for the great things she did. Less so as time went on because she's a fire mage. So she's a tier 11 wielder. Her backstory is actually that she also has some god blood. So she's ultra powerful, obviously. And she grew up with dragons. So she bonded with Golkarion at age like 5. And she's been with him ever since. So she has such an interesting story. And part of what I wanted to do with the Great War prequels is show how much she influenced history, and people knowing the current saga and knowing how little the modern world knows about her, just seeing that, destruction and sort of being like, oh no, how did this come to pass? Poor Beldine. So I like Beldine a lot. She's really awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, I think if I had my pick, I don't know if you've ever read John Scalzi's The Old Man's War. It's a science fiction. So what he did was he wrote a novel, and then there's a sequel and another sequel, but then he tells the story from his daughter's perspective.
Oh,
so you get Zoe's tale later on, where it's the same events, just told from a different point of view. And it's kind of neat because she saw a bunch of things that you didn't see. I would think that would be neat to see from Fletcher's. I always thought Fletcher was kind of a good, strong side character where
he's definitely
happened, but he was just always there. He was always helpful. He always did whatever Carrion needed him to. And if I was going to get a prequel, I'd want to hear Viren's tale leading up to Dragon Blood, I think is when he's introduced, right?
Yes. I would like that too. That would be interesting to see. Because he has
Carrion bumped into him. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm just kind of like, oh, Viren.
So when she bumps into him in Dragon Blood, he's a very established person. He's achieved a lot. He has a high status. I would love to see him go from a kid, a young man, etc., and where he went from being, when he was kind of coming into his own, right up until Carrion crashed into his life and kind of upended everything that he probably had planned for the rest of his life and what he would do. Obviously Carrion took him on a very different path. So I think it'd be kind of neat to see. I remember there was one of the old Star Wars novels I read. It was a backstory of Han Solo, and the very last page of the book was him and Chewbacca sitting in a booth watching Luke and Obi-Wan come into the cantina, and then the book ended, and that's immediately where he picks up in New Hope. And I kind of think that would be pretty neat for both.
Yeah, for sure. I'm all about Viren, so I would absolutely do that. And I worked on a lot of his backstory, so you see a little bit of the pathos and tragedy of his early childhood. Actually, his whole life kind of sucks. despite having come from a royal bloodline. You know, his father disowns him basically right at birth, hates him. He thinks because he's, quote, disfigured, he's born without, this is left, no, right. He's born without a right hand. I'm sorry, I'm actually dyslexic. And so that kind of drives a lot of his pathos, and he's constantly trying to do his best and trying to become the person his father wants him to be. He thinks his father wants him to be. But that doesn't make him happy, of course. His father is not a nice man. He's a king who's obsessed with money and power. Shocker. So actually, Viren sort of saw his life playing out as, and we get into this actually in book 5. We uncover more of Viren's backstory and why he is the way he is. I'm going to leave it at that without giving away too many spoilers. But in terms of physicality and also magic, we get explanations for that. So that's definitely something that I would delve into, absolutely.
Very cool. All right, well, I think that kind of wraps things up. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through Dragon Empress and everything that led up to it. And it was great to hear more about your whole story arc. And like I said, I beta read this for you early on, but I haven't read, I just got this copy. So I'm excited to see how it turned out for the final version. So if you haven't read Dragon Speaker and All the Way Up, remember to go out and buy those from your local bookseller. And then if you're ready to dive into Dragon Empress from Elana Mugdan, and the story's great and you're gonna love it. So thanks again for joining us. And Elana, it was great to see you and talk to you as always.
Great to see you and talk to you as well. I'm glad we had the chance to do this, and thank you for inviting me on your show.
Oh, anytime. All right, well, have a good night. I'll talk to you all later. All right,
Take
bye.
care.